There is a sentence near the end of the first section of this little book that ought to make any reader stop cold. The bourgeoisie, Marx writes, produces above all its own gravediggers. He meant it as prophecy, and for the better part of a century, millions of people staked their lives and ended the lives of others on the conviction that the prophecy was about to be fulfilled. The Communist Manifesto is barely 30 pages long. No pamphlet of comparable length has ever moved so much of the world. Published in the revolutionary winter of 1848 by two young German exiles, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, it set out to do something audacious. To explain the whole of human history by a single principle, to diagnose the disease of the modern age, and to announce, with the confidence of men who believed they had read the future in the present, exactly how the disease would end. Marx was a philosopher trained in Hegel, turned journalist, turned revolutionary. Engels was the son of a factory owner who knew the mills of Manchester from the inside. Together they made a claim that all history is the history of class struggle, that capitalism is digging its own grave, that private property must be abolished, and that on the far side of revolution lies a world without classes and without the state. 4 claims. We will take them one at a time. Begin where the manifesto begins, because everything rests on it. The history of all hitherto existing society, Marx announces in his first real sentence, is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, the whole human past is a sequence of contests between those who own and those who labor. And the great upheavals of history are the moments when a rising class shatters the order that confines it. Ideas, religion, law, morality, these are not independent forces, but the upper story of a building whose foundation is the way men produce their bread. Change the mode of production, and everything above it changes too. This is the master key, and Marx turns it in every lock. I want to give this claim its due because there is real sight in it. Marx saw, more clearly than almost anyone before him, that material conditions shape consciousness, that the merchant and the serf do not see the world the same way, that interest bends thought, that the powerful tend to mistake the arrangements that favor them for the eternal order of things. When he writes that the bourgeoisie has torn away the sentimental veil and reduced human relations to naked cash payment, he has seen something true and grievous about what an acquisitive society does to the bonds between people. A man who wants to understand why a given age believes what it believes can do worse than to ask who profits. There is wisdom of a kind here, and it is no accident that even those who reject Marx entirely have absorbed his suspicion that comfort breeds convenient convictions. But watch what the claim has to do to be the master key. It must reduce. If all of history is at bottom class struggle, then everything that is not class struggle must be explained away as a disguise for it. And here the framework begins to consume the very evidence that should test it. Consider the thing Marx is most eager to dissolve, the inner life of the person. A man kneels in a cold church not because he has weighed his class interest, but because he believes, rightly or wrongly, that he stands before something real and holy. Marx must call this an illusion, an opiate, a reflex of material want, because if it were what it claims to be, a genuine apprehension of a reality higher than production, the master key would not fit. And this is the tell, a theory that can only proceed by declaring the deepest human experiences to be masks for something else is not explaining those experiences. It is refusing to look at them. The person is not a precipitate of his economic position. He is made for something, oriented toward a good that no rearrangement of the means of production can supply or cancel, and the long human testimony to that orientation, in prayer, in sacrifice, in the love that ruins a man's material interest, and he gives it anyway, is exactly the data the materialist conception must throw out to survive, so the foundation is narrower than the building it claims to support. What the first claim establishes against its own intention is that man cannot be read off from his conditions, and that matters enormously for everything that follows, because the next 3 claims all assume that he can. This brings us to the engine of the whole prophecy, the claim that capitalism, by its own inner logic, drives society into 2 hostile camps and grinds the worker steadily downward until misery itself makes him a revolutionary. The bourgeoisie, Marx argues, cannot stop revolutionizing production. In doing so, it concentrates wealth in fewer and fewer hands, while the proletariat swells and sinks. The modern laborer, he writes, instead of rising with industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of his own class. Polarization and immiseration, these are the gears that turn the gravedigger's prophecy from hope into supposed certainty. What is right here is the description of a real cruelty. Marx was looking at the Manchester of the 1840s, and the Manchester of the 1840s was a genuine horror. Child labor, 16-hour days, lungs filled with cotton dust, human beings used like fuel. His indignation is the honest response of a man who has seen the worker treated as a thing, and any tradition that holds the human person to bear the image of God must share that indignation without reservation. To reduce a man to an instrument of another's profit is a real desecration. On the moral fact of exploitation, Marx is not wrong to be angry. But the prediction built on that anger has now been tested for 170 years, and it failed in the most decisive way a prediction can fail. The opposite happened. The industrial working class of the developed world did not sink deeper and deeper into misery. It became, over the following century, more prosperous, more secure, better fed, longer lived and more bourgeois in its hopes than Marx could have imagined. And it did so not by abolishing the market, but through it, through rising productivity that made labor itself more valuable. Here the Austrian economists saw what Marx's framework structurally could not. The market is not merely an engine of extraction. It is a vast system for discovering and communicating knowledge that no one possesses in whole. What is scarce, what is wanted, what a man's effort is worth, through prices that no planner could compute. Marx treated value as a quantity congealed in a commodity by labor, a thing to be measured and redistributed. But value is not congealed in anything. It lives in the judgments of acting persons, and it shifts with their needs and their knowledge. Miss that, and you will predict that the worker must sink, because you have already decided that the market only takes. You will not predict that the same market, left to coordinate the dispersed knowledge of millions, can lift him, because your theory has no room for the thing actually doing the lifting. What the failure of this prediction establishes is not merely that Marx got a forecast wrong. It is that the error was not incidental but structural. It followed necessarily from a picture of economic life that could not see coordination, only extraction. And a man who cannot see coordination is about to recommend that we abolish the thing that does it, which is the third claim and the heart of the program, the abolition of private property and the gathering of all the means of production into the hands of the state. Marx is explicit and unembarrassed. The theory of the communists, he writes, may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. And the 10 measures he proposes are not vague. Centralization of credit in a national bank with exclusive monopoly, centralization of all transport and communication in the hands of the state, extension of state-owned production under a common plan, equal liability of all to labor, the establishment of industrial armies. He believed this concentration would not enslave but liberate, because once the bourgeoisie was dispossessed, there would be no class left to wield the state as a weapon. Property was the chain. Strike it off, and man goes free. I will grant the moral intuition underneath it, because it is a real one and a serious one. Marx looked at a world where a few owned everything and the many owned nothing but their hands, and he judged that arrangement to be a violation of the human person. That judgment is sound. A social order in which men are reduced to their usefulness and the earth is hoarded by the few while the many go without is not a just order, and to say otherwise is to flatter power. The hunger for a world where the goods of creation serve all of God's children, and not merely the strong, is a holy hunger. Marx did not invent it. He inherited it, secularized, from the very tradition he despised. But look closely at what the cure actually does. To abolish private property and vest all production in the state is not to free the person from power. It is to remove every shelter standing between the person and power. Property, for ordinary men, is not chiefly capital. It is the small standing ground from which a man can say no. It is the home the authorities cannot enter, the plot that feeds a family the state did not feed, the workshop, the parish, the savings that make a man something other than a supplicant. These mediating things, the family, the guild, the town, the church, the holding passed from father to son, are precisely what stand between the lone individual and the total power of the centre. Marx proposes to dissolve every one of them into a single association of the whole nation, administering all production by a common plan, and he calls the result freedom. But a man who owns nothing and depends for everything, his bread, his work, his movement, his children's schooling, on a single authority that cannot be appealed to or escaped, is not free. He is the most perfectly governed creature imaginable. The 20th century did not misunderstand Marx on this point. It read him correctly and built exactly what he described, and the result was not the withering of coercion, but its apotheosis, the famine engineered as policy, the industrial army made literal, the citizen owning nothing and therefore able to refuse nothing. This is not the perversion of the idea, it is the idea arriving on time. What the third claim establishes, then, is the deepest thing in the book and the most mistaken, that the human person is most free when most unencumbered, when every intermediate loyalty has been cleared away. The truth runs the other way. The person is not most himself in isolation from family, community, and inherited place. He is most himself in communion with them. Strip them away in the name of liberation, and you do not produce a free man. You produce an atom, and an atom is the easiest thing in the world to govern, which carries us to the last claim, the one that gives the whole book its strange and luminous confidence, that on the far side of the revolution, class antagonism simply ends, the state loses its political character and withers, and there arises in Marx's most beautiful sentence an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. No more masters, no more servants, no more coercion, because with classes abolished, the very thing the state existed to manage will have vanished. And I will not pretend this vision is not moving. It is. It is a vision of the peace of the city of God, of swords beaten into plowshares, of a humanity reconciled. And the reason it has drawn the noblest as well as the cruelest of men is that it speaks to something the human heart actually longs for and was actually made for. Marx, the great unmasker, is here at his most unguarded. He wants the kingdom, he simply cannot say its name, but everything we have already seen converges on the flaw in this final hope, and it is the same flaw that has run beneath all four claims. Marx locates the source of human conflict outside the person, in the structure of property, in the division of classes, so that to change the structure is to perfect the man. Abolish the conditions that set men against each other, and men will cease to be set against each other. This is the assumption on which the whole eschatology rests, and it is false. The fault does not run between the classes, it runs through the center of every human heart, the propertied and the dispossessed alike, the pride, the envy, the will to dominate, the appetite that no redistribution can satisfy because it was never really about the goods. Marx promised that abolishing private property would abolish the war of all against all. What the experiments founded on his book actually revealed is that the war simply migrated inward and upward, into the party, the committee, the purge, because the men who made the revolution carried the old disorder of the soul across the barricade with them, untouched. You cannot cure by rearrangement what is not a problem of arrangement. The sickness is not in the system around the man, it is in the man, and it requires not a new distribution but a new heart, which is exactly the transformation Marx's materialism had ruled out of existence on the first page. So look at what the four claims, taken together, finally amount to. They are not a series of separable errors, a forecast here and a policy there that might be patched and saved. They are a single mistake, made once, at the root, and then carried with magnificent rigor all the way to its conclusions. The mistake is about what a human being is. Marx took the person to be a product of material conditions, so he could not see the soul that prays, could not see the value that markets discover rather than congeal, could not see why the small estates of family and faith and property are the very organs of a free life, and could not see that the war he hoped to end was being waged inside the men he was counting on to end it. Every prediction that failed for that one reason. Every prescription that turned to horror turned for that one reason, and here is the part that should give even his fiercest opponents pause. Marx was right that the modern world is sick. He saw the cash nexus dissolving every higher bond, saw men reduced to instruments, saw a civilization that had made a religion of acquisition and called it freedom. And he was not wrong to be in anguish over it. He simply mistook the disease for the cure. He thought the cure for a world that had forgotten the human soul was a system built on forgetting it more completely. The hunger that drives this book is real, and it is the oldest hunger there is, for a world made whole, for the goods of creation shared among all the children of God, for the end of the long oppression of man by man. That hunger is true. It points at something. It simply does not point where Marx aimed it. He gave the longing for the kingdom an address in this world, and built it, and the door opened onto a cellar. The grave the bourgeoisie was digging turned out to be empty. The one that filled was dug by the gravediggers themselves, for each other, in the name of a heaven they had decided to build with their own hands and had forgotten how to ask for.